So today I'm going to talk about something that I think is important to a lot of people. A lot of people meet me and ask me questions around prayer, when you should pray, how long you should pray, and things like that, and more around coordinating or organizing their prayer lives. One thing that I would share, which hopefully it adds value to your knowledge, is that there are different ways people pray. Some people pray based on a regimented sort of or routine. Some people say they pray at 3 o'clock. Some people pray for 1 hour every day. Some people pray for 30 minutes every so often. And I too sometimes have times when I've allocated for prayer and things like that. However, there's a difference between praying prayer like that, or routine prayer, and being in the presence of God. Being in the presence of God brings much more value than when you have regimented prayer. And this is what I mean. Usually if you spend time in the presence of God, you get to a point where you climb up, or you begin to cruise. You pray until you cruise, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, so just give me a second. Now, what happens when you put a routine time for prayer is that most of the time you count the number of songs you sing, or you have a list of 15 prayer points or something like that. And what you do is you say, well, I'm going to pray for next 15 minutes. So for that, I just sing 2 songs, and then I'll do the rest of I have 10 prayer points, 1 minute for each prayer point, or whatever it is that people do. Obviously you're constrained with time, and so you're trying as much as possible to pray. Yes, that is effective in its own way. However, the most effective one is when you spend quality time, when there is no restriction in terms of time of how long your songs are going to be, or even how many prayer points you're going to pray. Think about a plane. A plane, when it's on the tarmac, it leaves the tarmac, taxis, goes to the runway, it runs all the way, and then it takes off, right? Okay, now if you took the plane away from the tarmac, you took it all the way to the runway, and you stopped there, obviously the plane never took off. And that is what happens when we restrict, or you have strict time to pray, which could be 15 minutes. And sometimes we start the prayer, somebody could just thank God for today and thank God for everything and move on. Yes, they've prayed, but what they've probably done is they've moved the plane from the tarmac and just moved it around, and it's probably heading towards the runway, and it stopped there. The thing with that is, yes, there's a difference, something will change, it's prayer, but they haven't maximized that prayer session. When you spend quality time with God, and that is when you don't have restrictions in terms of time or any of the other things that we put with routine prayer, you enter into the presence of God, you start to worship, you start to sing, and you observe that at a certain point, you're not constrained on how many songs you're singing. At a certain point, you start to get into the rhythm of the Spirit. A lot of times when that happens, you lose your consciousness. And what I mean is not you don't go unconscious, but you lose many things around. You lose your sense of awareness of where you are. Sometimes you start to speak in unknown tongues, and sometimes you start to sing the song in a way you've never sang it before. Sometimes you even start to compose a song in the middle of that session. And some people who have experienced this know exactly what I'm talking about. That is the point where you have gone to a point where you have taken off, or at least you're on the runway and you're taking off. The plane starts to go off. If we're meant to pray for an hour, maybe that is the point where you hit the hour. And sometimes somebody would hear the clock or the bell ring or whatever it is that will notify you that it's an hour, and then they would stop there. But the plane was just about to take off. And that's why regimented prayer sometimes has its disadvantages. Most times what you find is when you get to that point, you start perhaps speaking in tongues, or you start praying, and like I said, you lose your sense of awareness. You're not so much bothered about your environment. And at that point, sometimes you start to pray for things that you didn't plan to pray for. So sometimes you wanted to pray for healing for somebody, but then you find yourself praying for wisdom for yourself. And you think that was not even part of my prayer points. And that's where you begin to see that we know not what we ought to pray, but the Holy Spirit at that point begins to tell you what you should pray about, and begins to pass a message to you. And you start to pray for things that you thought or you never had planned to pray for. And that is why it's important at that point, because you start to take off at that point. If you let yourself and you're not conscious of time, and you continue to float into that, you cruise on, you continue to climb until you get to a cruising point. And what I mean by that is you pray until at a point you feel a sense of satisfaction, you feel so much peace in your mind. And sometimes you've not even prayed one, or you've not said anything concerning one of the prayer points on your list, and yet you get to that point. That is the cruising point when it comes to prayer. The problem with this, or maybe not a problem, but the thing with this is sometimes it will take a whole hour to get to that point. Sometimes it takes 2 hours, sometimes it takes 6 hours to get to that point. And that is why spending time praying in God's presence should be something that you should put or do when you're not constrained by time. Yes, you should have your routine prayer time so that you can maintain a good prayer or a healthy prayer life, but you should also realize that it's important, and where you maximize your prayer sessions is when you actually get to cruise, when you actually get to move the plane, go on the runway, take off, and get to, whatever it is, 40,000, 50,000 feet, and I'm just using this as an analogy, where you start to cruise, where you pray until you feel the peace of God. When you do that, that is when you have actually maximized that session. So hopefully you have learned a thing or two. Maybe it's something you already knew, something you're already practicing. I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comment section, but this is my experience when it comes to prayer, and I try to do that as many times as I can, because I can't always wake up at a time when I have so much time. Sometimes I wake up at a time when I start just getting into that point where I feel like I'm beginning to take off the runway, and then I realize, look, I have to take a shower because I need to go and do work or something. But yeah, a lot of times when I have been in the position where I have prayed until I have cruised, I have found that very refreshing, and I found the results phenomenal. So yeah, just leave your comments in the leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear from you. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Peace.